Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. Today's video is a recap of my trip to North Wilkesboro and the All-Star race. We have a ton to cover, including Kevin Harvick taking a not-so-subtle shot at Stewart-Haas Racing, Denny Hamlin cussing on the air when talking about Goodyear, which, in a twist of events, he wasn't talking bad about the tire manufacturer, and of course, we'll talk about the race, the tires, what Joey Logano told me before the race about them, and the fight between Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I think the timing of it is really interesting after what Kevin Harvick said just last week. Speaking of Harvick, let's go back to Friday and what he had to say during his media availability. Running practice laps for Kyle Larson, who was in Indianapolis prepping for the Indy 500, the rookie Fox announcer met with reporters and was asked about the differences in working with Hendrick Motorsports versus his time at Stewart-Haas Racing. Take a listen.
I heard from the owner twice in 2 weeks, so that's different. It's interesting to see, just the race shop and the structure and the way that everybody goes about it differently. I mean, there's a million different ways you can do things, but I think the thing that sticks out for me about Hendrick Motorsports in general is it's truly run like a business that is a part of an actual structure of how things flow and who you talk to, and there's just the depth of the business side and the racing side is, it's deep, and I think that is I think that is pretty eye-opening just from the structure from the whole thing, and I like structure. I think our team was. Our team, the Ford team itself, was very structured. We had a great group of people that communicated well, did a lot of little things well, but also took the burden of some things that were probably not as structured within the organization to be able to do those things and still run well was a burden, right, for all the guys on the team. So I had a very special group of people that succeeded in a structure that wasn't as structured as what we're in currently in this situation.
Interestingly, Harvick's remarks about his team being structured lines up with what Chase Briscoe told me earlier this year at COTA about the teams working independently of each other.
So over the off season, I think it was finally addressed that, like, hey, we have serious issues that we need to try to handle. And you obviously saw that with Tony coming out publicly and saying stuff, and then just internally we changed a lot of our processes and things that we do at the shop, and just trying to make things more structured and organized, and honestly just work more as a cohesive unit, where in the past it was kind of four separate teams doing their own things.
The weekly soap opera that is Stewart-Haas Racing continues, and I'm here for it. Moving on, let's talk about Cup practice. During the session, there was considerable tire falloff, and drivers were excited about the potential opportunities it would present in the race. Take a listen to what Denny Hamlin had to say about it.
Yeah, I give Goodyear a lot of shit a lot of times, but they nailed it with this one. It's just a great tire, great lap time variation between the two tires, and also just the ability to pass with it because there's a difference in speed between the cars.
Before we move on to the race, I just want to talk about my experience at North Wilkesboro, which all happened courtesy of Ford. One word describes it: effing awesome. Okay, 2 words. I flew in on Saturday morning, and after an unofficial trip just to see the outside of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, for the first time in my life, I drove a race car, a Ford Dark Horse Mustang at the Ford Performance Racing School at Charlotte Motor Speedway. I won't go into the details because I created a short video of that here. On Sunday, we took the full tour of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. I'll have a full video of that later this week. For those of you who've never been, I think you'll enjoy it because I took a ton of photos and video thinking what anyone who's never been there before would want to see. Up next was the short trip up to North Wilkesboro. First of all, the area is absolutely gorgeous, and the speedway itself is tucked in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Just an idyllic setting. I remember regularly writing about Dale Jr.'s comments on his podcast several years ago about his desire to revive the historic track. When you go there and see how SMI has modernized it while maintaining much of its history, you realize it was absolutely the right decision. And the last thing before we move on to the race, I have to also mention how wild of a scene it was to see Kyle Larson choppering in from Indy. Not every day you get to see that. Now to the actual race, and as any of you who have followed the channel know, since March at Circuit of the Americas, I was asking drivers about the possibility of using different tire compounds. I even asked Goodyear Director of Racing Greg Stucker about the subject at Texas in April, and he said that it might be an option. A few weeks later, NASCAR announced the different tires would be used at the All-Star race. I was pumped. I really felt like this could be the magic bullet. Hamlin agreed all the way up until practice. Before the race, I asked Joey Logano his expectations with the option tires on the repaved surface.
From a tire fall-off perspective, you know, you're asking for tire fall-off at a brand new surface racetrack. They want to be tire fall-off with the old car here, right? Like the trucks didn't have a bunch of fall-off, but they have the old tire on it. We've accomplished some fall-off. How much fall-off, I'm not sure yet. We're going to figure that out. There's still a ton of grip in the car. There's still, when you go to the gas so hard, you're at the throttle. That part will still be there. You know, there's not that much fall off to where you feel like you're spinning the right tires yet. They just fall off a fair amount of lap time, but not to where the old car would be, where you could put the gas down when you had a small tire and 900 horsepower.
Logano's comments were realistic and turned out to be pretty spot on. As we all saw, there was tire fall-off, but not as dramatic as most everyone hoped. However, that being said, it wasn't as bad as some might want to portray it. For starters, let's first look at last year's race on the old surface. Yeah, the one where Kyle Larson dominated in a much different way than Logano did, leading much of the race in the second-place car by close to 4 seconds. Logano led 199 of the 200 laps, and that number will be why many suggested it wasn't a good race. But that definitely doesn't tell the full story. There was passing. I watched it with my own 2 eyes. Don't believe me, though. Kyle Larson, who started in the rear of the field, had moved up to 14th by lap 50. Chase Elliott, who started 15th on that lap 11 restart following the Ricky Stenhouse crash, moved up to 10th. Denny Hamlin had jumped from 12th to 9th in that span, while Kyle Busch dropped from 11th to 15th. In other words, there was movement. And the only reason there was movement is because there were 2 grooves. That typically doesn't happen on a repave, but there were clearly 2 grooves for most of the race, and that allowed for some great battles. I think one of the most compelling came late in that first half, when Logano lapped Noah Gragson and Michael McDowell, and many thought he would do the same to Bubba Wallace. For the final 20 laps, the Penske driver tried his damnedest to get past the number 23 car, even driving into his rear bumper and shoving him up the track on numerous occasions. But it didn't matter. The 2311 Racing driver, to his credit, held off Logano to stay on the lead lap as they reached the halfway point. In the second half, Logano took on another Toyota and Christopher Bell on the restart, and the pair battled for several laps before both cars got loose, allowing another Toyota and Denny Hamlin to join the party. The number 11 eventually surged out past his JGR teammate and battled the number 22 car and got a nose in front, but was unable to complete the pass for the lead. Then, in a move by Kyle Busch that understandably received a lot less attention because of what happened after the race, the number 8 car got into the rear of Ty Gibbs and sent the number 54 for a spin. Both Harvick and Bowyer both agreed Busch was frustrated. In the final 50 laps, Kyle Larson charged up front on fresher tires and looked like he might be a threat to win, but was unable to get past Hamlin and Logano. Logano held off the number 11 car at the end to win the 2024 All-Star race. And then, appropriately enough, with celebratory fireworks going off in the background, there were fireworks in the garage between Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Kyle Busch. You've all seen the different angles. However, before we get into the physical altercation, let's start with what started it all. Busch deliberately wrecked Stenhouse on lap 2. I don't think there's any denying that. The cameras showed it, and Busch effectively admitted as much to Bob Pockrass going back to his hauler.
It's the first lap of the race. We don't even have water temp in the car yet, and we're wrecking each other off of 2. Tired of getting run over by everybody. But that's what everybody does. Everybody runs over everybody to pass everybody.
Hearing those remarks immediately made me think of what happened back at COTA in March with Christopher Bell. Except that time, Busch didn't get payback on the track, but confronted his former teammate on pit road. But you could definitely sense the frustration building back then. The other thing that popped in my head when I saw what Busch did was the story I wrote last week on Heavy.com and a video I did on the channel about Kevin Harvick suggesting more drivers needed to get more aggressive and even go dirty if necessary. I think that incident definitely fits the bill. Plus, I think if there was ever a chance to do it, it was the All-Star race with no points on the line. But Stenhouse didn't care. He had been sitting in his hauler for close to 2 hours stewing about what had happened. What I found really interesting was their conversation, while heated, sounded like it was going to be resolved. Then Ricky threw the punch, and all hell broke loose. Ricky's dad is no doubt going to get punished for his involvement. As for the other crew members, I don't think anything will happen. I'm fairly confident that neither driver will either be punished because NASCAR President Steve Phelps mentioned twice earlier this year how he wanted drivers to lean into conflicts. I do have a couple of takeaways from the altercation, and it's based on what was said in the final exchange between the two drivers, including Stenhouse saying he will get Busch back at Charlotte, and Busch responding saying he didn't care because he sucks just as bad as Ricky does. I think, 1, it's not over, and 2, I think more concerning for Rowdy fans, Busch is in a bad place, saying he sucks just like Ricky. Was it a dig? Of course it was, but it was a dig as much at himself as it was Stenhouse. Busch knows he's dropped off in performance this year. The two-time champ has struggled in the number 8 car in 2024 with 5 top 10s in the first 13 races and an average finishing position of 16.0. Comparing that with last year, Busch had 6 top 10s, but a pair of them were wins. There's still half the regular season remaining for the number 8 team to right the ship. Can it be done? Sure. He's a champ and one of the greatest of all time. Will it happen? I don't know. What I do know is if Busch continues with this same aggressive driving mentality, we just might have some more fireworks with other drivers this year, and I think that will be a great thing for the sport. The fight was definitely the cherry on top for an awesome All-Star race weekend at North Wilkesboro. I really want to thank Ford for the opportunity to cover the event, and I will definitely encourage anyone, if you have the chance, go to next year's race. It will be a racing experience you will never forget. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to know what you thought about what Kevin Harvick had to say comparing SHR with HMS. As for the race, what did you think? Did you enjoy it? And of course, what did you think of the fight? Do you think Busch will rebound and get it together and make the playoffs? And do you agree with Dale Jr. that they need to put cement in all the tunnels going forward so drivers can't leave the venue and are forced to stew and think about it? I'm kidding, but it is a creative idea. Remember, if you want to read my written work, go check it out at heavy.com. Also, go to beatingandbanging.com if you want to sign up for my weekly email newsletter, and you'll receive an email each Friday recapping the top stories from the week, including reviews of the various NASCAR-related podcasts. Also, make sure to check out my podcast, Beating and Banging, on the Blue Wire Network. Thanks as always for supporting the channel, and have a great rest of your day.